Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations in Horror, the podcast. I'm your host, Kevin L. Powers. I'm also the owner operator of Something Wicked Entertainment Events, and welcome to this podcast. Now, if you've been listening to our podcast, you'll know that what we do is we kind of dissect and analyze a single movie in the course of 30 minutes, an hour, however long it takes me and my special guest to discuss the movie. Sometimes it can be short, sometimes it can be really long, but we just hope that you enjoy our conversation about this movie. That being said, we're going to be discussing the classic movie today, and we're going to probably dissect it as much as we possibly can, especially with my special guest today, which is Philip Ray. Welcome, Philip Ray, to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. It's always good to have you come back to the show. We always have a pleasant time talking about whatever movie we are talking about. And for everyone listening, we are talking about the original Tobe Hooper directed Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974. Now, I'm probably going to get a lot of haters from me on this side of the film, but I would like to get your impressions and your ideals about this film, kind of when you first watched it, when you were aware of it, what you kind of saw in this film.
So, for me personally, I am a big fan of the Texas Chainsaw. At least, not all of the movies. There's a lot of problems with some of the later movies, but I overall love the Texas Chainsaw Massacre idea. I came in. I don't even know how I came upon the first movie, but I remember just being glued the entire time. I think the marketing for the movie was what really sold me, of like them going like, this is based on a true story and stuff, and everything you see here is like based on true events. I think that is what just sparked my interest, and then everything with like the design of Leatherface and all of that, I just fell in love with the character. This is my favorite horror movie of all time, personally. It was what got me into all the horror movies was this movie. That's how it was very influential for me.
So you're gonna really hate me. I've never liked this film, ever. I grew up watching this film in the 80s and just thought that this movie was horrible because Sally Hardesty just screams too damn much for me. As a kid growing up, I thought this was the worst horror film I watched. But that was because my mother loved it so much. She loved this movie, and so I saw this more times than I probably would have liked to have seen it. It did scare me as a kid because some of the stuff in there it was like shocking to me. But that's not why I hated it. I hated it because there was so much screaming, and I got really annoyed with the Franklin character at a young age. Like, I'm young watching this movie in the 80s, and I'm like, I couldn't stand watching this movie with Franklin acting like a little bitch the whole movie. And then, of course, Sally, who ends up screaming for the second half of this film almost the entire time. That took me out of the movie for decades. Like, decades, I hated this movie. If I was to tell you now if I hate this movie, I don't hate it now. And the reason being is because I got to read a lot of stuff about Gunnar Hansen, and I got to follow his career. And as that happened, I started to reevaluate the movie. And now, I still don't love. I don't think this is a great movie at all. I understand why it is an iconic film. Don't get me wrong. I understand why it's an iconic film. I just would rather watch any of the other sequels than watch this one, unless I am specifically watching it for Gunnar Hansen, who is the only person in the movie I thought was brilliant, even as Leatherface. There's just certain things in this movie that he does as Leatherface that I've just stuck in my head. And I am a huge fan of Hansen. So that was my little tidbit. And I know there's a lot of people out there who's probably saying this is blasphemous because this is not a film that I highly regard, but I understand why other people do regard it so highly.
I mean, it is a movie. Like, when it first came out, it had a mixed reaction when it came out, and there are some things about the movie I will agree that were, again, like, this movie was made. I mean, again, it's to a point, like, with what it was made on only on a thousand for a hundred $140,000. It was a very small budget at the time. So it is, I mean, honestly, with what they were able to get away with, and again, I think one of the reasons it's so well known is again the marketing I think was done really well. Again, like I think everyone who's ever seen the first trailer will remember again like what you're about to see is true.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something you that's not something you would see in any other horror movie. Like there are a lot of people that when that movie came out, they saw the trailer, they legitimately thought that was real.
Oh, I thought it was real. Yeah, I thought growing up, I thought this movie was a true story.
Yeah, and that's how brilliant the marketing is. I think that's one of the main reasons it's well known. And so has so much of an impact in horror movie and stuff is that. And but again, I think but there are some problems with the movie, and I will agree it's not a perfect movie any aspect. It's just what they were able to achieve was just again really smart. It was really smart. Because because that was another thing too was Leatherface is based on the actual serial killer Ed Gein, and that's something again you don't see that you don't see that a lot with a lot of the other iconic horror movie icons. Jason isn't based on anyone. Freddy's not based on anyone. Like Chucky's not based on anyone. Like Leatherface is one of the few characters that's actually has some realm of realism.
Inspiration.
Because they were directly inspired. They were directly inspiration of a actual serial killer.
Yeah. So the things I'm going to say that I think that, and I'm not going to go into the whole plot. Everyone out there who is a horror fan has seen this movie. This is not a film that people have not seen. Any horror fan with their weight of gold has seen this one, and I've seen every sequel because I've learned to appreciate all of the films in this franchise for different reasons. But this is one of the few that in the entire franchise I've seen. Like I've seen this movie a lot of times. Even when I was a kid, my mother used to watch this movie. I saw it with her, and then as I got older, I would watch it again and again and again whenever a new sequel came out. Because as a kid, when a new sequel come out, I had to go back and watch all of them to catch myself up. I've seen this one a lot of times, but what always got me that took me out was the Franklin character and the Sally character. Now, having rewatched it yet again, but with a more critical eye, there are aspects of this film I think are absolutely brilliant. I think that the opening crawl with the whole what's going on that kind of puts the audience in the mood that this might be a true story and narration, I think was brilliant. I still think it's brilliant. It's one of the few openings to a horror film that I think is absolutely flawless. I think it's flawless up until the point where we see the Sally and her friends in the van, because I love the aspect where you're seeing the pictures in the dark of all the body parts. And then the first thing you see are the two bodies intertwined on the tombstone. And of course, you get the background narration telling you everything that's going on. All that I think is absolutely brilliant. I think that is an amazing opening for a horror film. And to be honest with you, I always thought that was even when I was a kid. I always liked the opening of this movie. I didn't like the moment where Franklin starts acting like a bitch and Sally started running around like a chicken with her head cut off. That is what always took me out of the film. Up until that point, I always did not mind the movie. It's just those two things just threw me out of the film.
Yeah, the thing too is I didn't mind that as much because of the fact of the situation they were in and stuff. It just never bothered me. And even later on, I understand more of like, there's a lot of claustrophobia in the movie because it's not, that's another thing. You look at a lot of the horror movies, they go all around. This whole entire movie is, other than the opening and stuff where we get the characters on the road trip, other than that, most of the movie is in a house or around the area of the house. It doesn't go it doesn't go too far into other different areas. And so with that, and I think a lot of that has to do with its budget to a point, but it's like, so I understand a little bit of why you have to have a little bit of like the whole, uh, a little bit of like the whole chicken with their head coming off with Pam's character, with Sally's character, and then Franklin and stuff. Like I didn't mind Franklin enough with that, but I understood a little bit of that.
I hated
After other watchings.
I hated Franklin when I was a kid watching this movie, and then when I rewatched it for our podcast, I still hate his character. I think for me now, he comes off as the brother to Sally who has a mental disability. And I don't think I took that into consideration when I originally watched this as a kid. He definitely comes off as has a brother with some type of mental disability as well as a physical disability, because the way he's enamored with the hitchhiker who's playing with the guns and not the guns, but the knife. And then, of course, everything the hitchhiker does. And then he becomes obsessed with the hitchhiker coming back for him. And then, of course, he gets teased by Jerry at one point in the second act where, oh, no, the hitchhiker's going to find you. He's going to find you. And Franklin's character is just obsessed with this. He's thinking that the hitchhiker's going to come get him like he's a little kid. I never saw that character as having a mental issue until this recent watch. And if I rewatch it again, I'll probably have a clearer definition of all this so that I can actually probably appreciate his character a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, like, to me, I guess also, like, because I guess the difference, too, is, I guess, because you saw it as a kid, and so at that time, I mean, there were horror movies, but but like for me, when I saw the movie, I was already aware of other horror movies. So like, especially back then, like I guess to me, my enjoyment of the movie was I didn't care too much about Pam and Franklin too much, because again, in my brain, it's like it's a horror movie. You don't care about you don't care about the meat bags that are going to get horribly mutilated and stuff. So that's why, like with Franklin and stuff, like I didn't pay too much mind to him as much, because also, especially being a young boy, I was obsessed with just the design of Leatherface and the concept of Leatherface.
Well, see, that's the only thing that the saving grace for this film. Because to be honest with you, I do not care for the hitchhiker character. I don't care for the old man character. I found the grandpa character only interesting at the dinner scene. And so Leatherface is literally the only character I find interesting, which is the opposite of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, in which I love Bill Moseley as Chop Top. And I love Leatherface in that one. And so it's one of those things where this one didn't hit me like the sequels did. Like I enjoyed the third Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 more than all of them for the longest time. I preferred that one over all the other ones. But as time goes on, as we think about some of these older films and the time period in which they were made, this one still stands out because it's gritty. It's not it is a dirty movie. The house is dirty. It's filthy. These people who live in it are filthy. They're not clean cut. This is not like your typical movie of the 70s. Like, this is a really nasty movie, despite the fact there is very little on-screen horror in this movie.
Yes. And going back to what we were saying about like with the other family members, yeah, I mean, I agree that their grandpa and the rest of the family, I didn't care too much about them too. They weren't really that scary either. They were just kind of there. Again, like Leatherface is like the main thing for me and stuff. But yes, it's so gritty. It's that's another thing about it is, again, it felt, and like they did this purposely. Actually, the director was like, his background before this movie was a little bit of documentary, and that's what at times the movie felt like. It felt like a documentary, which again goes into the whole thing of feeling like again, like this is based on a true story.
Well, considering that there are some actual real bones used in the movie, and of course there is real what do you call it? Real shit. Real a lot of real stuff was used in here. You hear about some of the stories about how awful it was on set because they could smell the foulness in the air and stuff like that. The great thing about this movie, and anyone who's seen this or knows about this, is there are a plethora of documentaries about the making of this film. And about how this film has affected the horror genre in general and franchises in general, because this franchise has probably got the strangest trajectory than any other horror franchise out there, except for probably Children of the Corn. But the less said about that franchise, the better. It kind of this is one where like it almost feels like each movie is its own separate entity from the others. And that's a great quality, and it's and sometimes it's a detriment overall. I mean, like I said, you watch the second movie, and there's barely any mention of the hitchhiker or the old man, but you have Chop Top, you have Leatherface, and you have Grandpa. I can't remember if there's any other characters in that one to save my life. And then, of course, the third film with Viggo Mortensen is one of the family members just gets more sadistic as they go on.
Yeah. And going again about how everyone, the documentary and stuff, it was very interesting because they used like real blood. Like most of the blood was actually real. They either most of it they got from from the local slaughter homes and stuff.
Thank you. Yeah.
But it was funny because this like one of the scenes, like the scene where they're feeding they're trying to Leatherface is feeding Grandpa. The actor Burns actually got his finger cut by a razor. Like that was actually real. And they said actually that by the end of like shooting, there was so much blood, like actual real blood, that it like the stage was almost like solid. Like it was almost everything was covered in blood.
Covered and dried up, yeah. There's some amazing documentaries about everything that they had to go through on this movie.
And I think that's another reason why, like for me, I enjoyed this movie so much, especially knowing behind the scenes and all that. It just made the movie just fascinating to me.
More so than any of the other sequels. I don't think I've seen any documentaries on any of the sequels past the second one, actually.
Yeah.
But there are several that are on this one, and there's several books too. So there's some amazing behind the scenes books on the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the franchise as a whole. But this one always takes up more space because despite some of the more, I guess you call it, yeah, I don't know the word I want to use for this. Despite the notorious nature of the film, there is a lot of thought that went into this film being Tobe. This wasn't Tobe Hooper's first movie. I think it was the second movie or third. I can't remember when this was released based on Eggshells, which I still haven't seen of his. Which I believe is his first film. But with this film, it has a undeniable.
Eggshells came first.
Huh?
Eggshells came first.
Okay, I have never seen it yet. I am not brave enough to watch that movie just yet. So I've always considered this his first movie, and I'm a Tobe Hooper fan. That's another thing. I loved what he did with the second film, and it's so different from this film. And I'm a huge fan of his followed his career, but never saw Eggshells. And there is no denying that this film has a style all of its own. There are lots of horror movies that came out in the 70s. But this one has a unique style that's all of its own because it tried to do something different. It comes off as a documentary, like you're saying. And those are the things that make it endearing. I mean, and the fact that so many people, when they saw this, thought it had too much blood, but in reality, there's almost no blood. It's what people thought they saw that they remembered. Is amazing. This isn't like, I think there's probably more blood in any of the other sequels compared to this one. Like there's blood in lots of them, but this one, it's all off screen. You don't see it. Probably because, not just a budgetary thing.
Yeah. Well, it's funny too because originally the movie was rated X, but they cut some things down to go back to an R, but the original cut was an X. And again, it's funny because if this movie came out now, there was because nowadays you see it with like Paranormal Activity with the marketing where they're like, this movie is so scary that people like cried and laughed and da da da. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre was one of the first movies that had that, where people actually were leaving the theater when it came out because they were so like disgusted and like horrified. Because again, they were like, it came out as a again, they marketed it as something that was actually real, and so again, it kind of had that War in the Worlds type feel at times.
No, I was trying to figure out when I saw this movie as a kid. So I would have seen this after the second one. I did not watch this one again. So somewhere around the 80s, mid 80s is when I saw this for the first time. And that's when my mother was obsessed with all things horror. I'm an 80s kid. I grew up on watching every horror film multiple times in the 80s because that's what my parents loved, was horror. And so I watched a lot of it. I was lucky enough to be able to watch this one and the second one. And then when the third one came out, I saw that straight on DVD, or DVDs weren't out then, VHS when it originally came out. But despite my dislike of the ending in this film, I always went back to watching this film, not only because of my mother, but because I was a horror fan in the 80s. And this is that film where all my friends always talked about it. Always. I mean, this isn't like, my friends always talked about, Jason, they always talked about Freddy, but Leatherface was always on their brain. So it was always one of those films where I got together with my friends and we all sit down and we chill and watch this damn movie. That's one of the other reasons why it's an endearing movie for me, and why I've seen it so many times. It's not because I just sat down and watched the movie. It's because at the time period it came out, it was one of those films where we'd rent it, we'd watch it, and then all the friends would get together on the weekend and we'd watch it again and we'd watch it again. It was one of those type of movies.
Well, one thing I also appreciated, and you said that you didn't like the ending, but like one thing I appreciate about the ending is the fact that, like, unlike a lot of horror movies where again you have the main you have the main characters defeat the monster, and then you get the stereotypical sometimes like, oh, are they really dead? This is one of the horror movies that again, like, the girl gets away, but Leatherface is still alive. Like, they don't beat Leatherface. She just survived. She's just able to get away, and that's it. And I appreciate that because a lot of times now you don't see that with horror movies. It's so stereotypical horror movies that they somehow beat the monster in the end, and then they do the fake out of, oh, are they really dead? But this is one of the movies, and a lot of the Texas Chainsaw Massacres have that every once in a while, where it's like, no, like, Leatherface doesn't die. The characters survive, are able to get away and survive, and that's it.
Yeah. And Leatherface is such a unique and different type of character. I don't think that this movie would be nearly as memorable if it didn't have Leatherface.
Absolutely.
His image with the mask is such an iconic thing, and they've changed the mask with every movie. And some movies is multiple masks because he wears different masks. But for the most part, I believe in this movie he wears the single mask because this all takes place within the same day. So he's not switching up the mask, and more the background with the mask comes in the second movie. The thing I did like about the movie is that it doesn't dwell on any of the torture for any of the characters. I think when Pam is put on the hook, and then we see her again in the freezer when Jerry finds her before he's dispatched, is about the longest we see of any of these characters torture. Because and I didn't think about this until I rewatched it. So this is something new for me, as I just never picked up on the fact that Franklin. This is probably the best thing that Franklin does in the whole movie. When they're driving, it's very beginning when they're driving in the van and they're passing the slaughterhouse. Franklin's the character who kind of reiterates what they did in the slaughterhouses because his uncle was there. Exactly how they used the hammer and what happens if they just hit him once. The cows might still be alive and they have to hit them multiple times. And then, of course, when the newer techniques came into play, they used the little bolt to the head thing. All that backstory that you're getting from Franklin is actually exactly what happens to them by Leatherface. Leatherface dispatches a lot of these, but just hitting them in the head with a hammer, especially Kurt, who's the first one. And what do you see? He gets hit in the head with a hammer, and you see him still moving around on the ground. His legs and body, he ain't dead. He's just moving around until Leatherface eventually, strikes him dead. And then, of course, Jerry gets the same thing. And then, of course, they try to do the same thing as Sally at the dinner table with Grandpa doing it. I can appreciate that now, whereas when I was a kid, all that went over my head. All of it went over my head. I would have never thought about any of that type of symbolism in the movie. This is why I say the movie gets better every age, because I start to see things I didn't see. The Franklin thing, I can say now, Franklin has some mental issues. That explains why he acts the way he does. And therefore, it makes what he does at the end much more feasible than if he's just a really bitchy brother.
Well, it's funny too because there is a lot of things. There's a lot of symbolism sometimes you don't realize. Like one thing is this movie was a very pro-vegetarian film. Because again, the movie is all about meat. It's about, you've got all these characters that are basically treated like meat. The family, the killer family is from again, they are basically slaughterhouse workers to a point.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't really think about that until you actually look at it. It's like, oh yeah, like this is all about like again, like this is if you look at it that way, you're like, oh yeah, like if vegetarians like this is why you shouldn't eat meat, show them this movie. And you're like, okay, like the director actually said that he gave up on eating meat while making this movie because he was like, yeah, yeah, it definitely had influence. Even Guillermo del Toro said that he became a vegetarian for a while after watching this movie.
Well, and you bring up a nice point that I didn't notice before. So one of because I'm older now, and despite the fact I watched this film, the last time I saw this was probably 3 or 4 years ago, or could be. Oh no, it was probably before COVID. Mostly because they came out with the 40th anniversary. Whenever the 40th anniversary is, they released a really pristine Blu-ray of the film, and so I bought that and I watched it, and that's what I watched for the rewatch. And the film looks amazing on Blu-ray now. And so what I didn't notice, and this always comes up in conversations, but I didn't really pay any attention to it, is when the hitchhiker is in the van and he's explaining how they make head cheese. Now, I've made a fan film on Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I have a friend who is really huge into Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I hate to say that the whole head cheese thing's always gone over my head because I just wasn't paying any attention. But until now, when I'm listening to the hitchhiker explain exactly how they make head cheese, which is really funny to me now. I didn't get that until just recently. But the ideal of the whole meat and them using all of the cow and all that type of stuff is really disturbing, because when Sally has escaped from Leatherface and she runs into the gas station, and the old man leaves the room to go see if there is a Leatherface outside. She's staring at the barbecue cooker, and it's like, all this meat in here, and you can't tell what type it is exactly. Some of it looks like sausage, but you're not sure what the rest of it is. And he lingers on that shot for a long time. And it's really disturbing because earlier in the day, you saw that Franklin was eating some of the meat from the gas station. And of course, he spits it out when he's in the house. But that meat becomes this whole thing where you're just disgusted by it when you're watching this movie, and you're like, oh my god, it's so disturbingly disgusting. And then of course you see there Pam is being saved for leftovers in the freezer, and it's like they're just treating these people as meat, and meat is disgusting and it looks disgusting in this movie. Even at the dinner sequence, it's like, oh, it's like you're not seeing any violence, but there's these underlying gut reactions that make you want to say, oh god, this movie's disgusting, without actually being very violent.
Yes, it makes you very much not want to eat. Like, you definitely do not want to be eating like a hamburger or any meat while watching this movie. And that is, I think, and some of that is the point. That is the point that they're trying to make. And I think they do it really, really well. And another thing too, again, this is thing people don't think about when they first watch it. That dinner scene is kind of a parody on the American sitcom Family, because the way it's set up, if you think about it, the way it's set up is kind of the setup like you see the sitcom, where you've got the family all there and they're bringing in the fresh meat to eat and all of that. And that's a parody. They did that purposely as a parody of like the American sitcom Family.
Oh no, I agree with you. I can't remember if I read that somewhere or someone said it in one of the documentaries, because unfortunately I've listened and read a lot about this movie. But it also goes to Tobe Hooper's playfulness, because of course, if you've seen the poster for Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, he's playing with the Breakfast Club's poster. They took the iconic Breakfast Club poster and put all the Leatherface's family on it, and he's playing with the audience when he does stuff like that. And I can see that exactly in that whole sitcom scene. And the thing is, that dinner scene is like the penultimate moment in the whole film. The whole family's gathered for the very first time. Yeah, for the most part of this movie, you don't see any of the family members together. They're all separate until this dinner scene, which is why it holds such a it holds such a grip on audiences, because a lot of stuff happens there. And most of the blood that you see actually comes from Sally at the dinner scene. She's getting hit in the head. you know, which is still funny. I still love that scene. I find it hilarious that they're trying to get Grandpa to knock out Sally's character, and he hits her but can't consistently hit her. And I only noticed this till now, that the hitchhiker is like getting tired of watching Grandpa do it, and he wants to do it himself. And then, of course, because he tries to do it himself, he allows the opening for Sally to get away. And I don't think I ever noticed that until now. I just found that hilarious as shit, that Grandpa can't do it, so he wants to do it. And
And then he messes up.
Well, he sort of does the same thing in the van when he, cuts himself and he's bleeding the whole time, leaving blood everywhere. And then he sets the little thing on fire, the picture on fire, which gets him kicked out of the van. He just seems like the special disability character of that family. So I'm trying to think of other things that we could talk on about the movie, because we've talked about so many of the things that I wanted to talk about, especially.
I mean, I think the last big point to really talk about again is the man himself, Leatherface, about how iconic the character and how much of a good design the character is. Because again, Texas Chainsaw Massacre came out before like Friday the 13th with Jason and Chucky, Child's Play, and then you've got Freddy with Nightmare on Elm Street and stuff. And Leatherface was one of the main originators of the slasher of the slasher icon of you have an iconic killing tool, and you've got the idea of the large figure that's masked and stuff. And again, Leatherface it's I think, again, as we talked about, I mean, he's the one that really made this film, but also he has such a big influence on the horror genre and himself.
Oh yeah.
That without Leatherface, you wouldn't have Jason, you wouldn't have Ghostface, you wouldn't have you may not even have like Freddy. You wouldn't have a lot of these current horror icons without Leatherface.
Well, that's being a very bold statement. I don't know about all that, but
I'll be bold.
I say that because I had to look it up because I wasn't sure about the year in which it was made. But a few years after this, because the other person who was working in this decade, other than George Romero, but the other person working in this decade extensively was Wes Craven, who came out with Last House on the Left before this, and then after this, he came out with The Hills Have Eyes. So I had to look up The Hills Have Eyes because I always forget when that's made. And so I always remember they're in the 70s, and all these people are not talking to each other because these are independently financed films. Everyone knows the notoriousness of this film possibly being financed by the mafia of some type, which is why Tobe Hooper never made any money off the residuals off this movie. But the ideal of these very gritty horror films were around during the 70s. But this one is the first one who created Leatherface, is probably the first one, and I have to do a little bit more extensive look at this. First one that came up with a distinctive look that became an iconic horror character. I can, the gritty look of horror films were around, because with The Last House on the Left, which was 2 years before this, Wes Craven was working with the Virgin Spring as his story background when he was creating that one. And then, of course, he took the Sonny Bean story when he kind of crafted The Hills Have Eyes. And of course, with this one, this is based a little bit on Ed Gein. So all these, between those two and some of the other people out there working, they were kind of coming up with these very gritty stories that were inspired by true stories, but not necessarily. They're far more remembered because of the fact that they're really gritty and realistic. And with that documentary feel that you said at the very beginning, that is by far one of the reasons why this has been such an influential film. That style in this film is something that is not prevalent in Craven's two films that I've mentioned before. It is here, so it makes it seem more realistic. And I guarantee you, like we said before, audiences were like, holy shit, this movie based on a true story. Good God.
Yep.
I don't think anyone's thinking that Last House on the Left is based on a true story.
No.
And we're hoping The Hills Have Eyes is not based on a true story.
Hope not.
Which our listeners out there, we've not discussed either one of those films, but hopefully we will eventually. Oh, Jesus. So, that being said, I do not know how much you're a fan of Hooper versus Gunnar Hansen. Do you know much about either one of these? Are you fans of either one of these, or in general, you just know the film has these two people involved in it?
I know they're two involved. I'm not too familiar with Gunnar Hansen.
He is someone. And I've read his book, and I've read lots of Texas Chainsaw Massacre books because I'm a huge fan of reading books about some of these iconic directors, what inspired them, how they came up with the story. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre has been written about and documented more extensively than so many other films out there. The thing is, Gunnar Hansen is one of those actors who you wouldn't know who he was having played this film. He thankfully was able to not be pigeonholed as someone in the mask all the time, and he's done many other horror films in which you get to see who he is. And so he's, he got pigeonholed as Leatherface, but thankfully his visage is not something that has made him nearly as pigeonholed as, say, like Robert Englund, who will forever be known as Freddy Krueger, despite the fact that he's done tons of other stuff that doesn't involve Krueger's gloved hand. Tobe Hooper, on the other hand, thankfully was able to experiment and do lots of other films outside this. I don't know if any of his other films ever got as popular or was ever as influential as this movie is. He's done a lot of movies I absolutely love. Most of them are cult movies because most people, when they came out, his films never really made a whole lot of money. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that his career went that path, and unfortunately, before he passed away, he was slumming it. Having done really bad movies like Mortuary and Crocodile and such. It is sad that the guy who created or helped to create Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise only ever had anything to do with the first two.
Yeah.
And Hinkle has had like a profound effect on many other films in the franchise, but Tobe Hooper only really had something to do with the first two, which is kind of sad. And the first film, nobody ever got any residuals from because of the way it was financed. So the thing is, he was a visionary director, and he'll always be remembered for this one and not for the better film, which is Poltergeist, because that's got too much of Spielberg's overshadowing on it. Which is also a shame. I almost forgot about Poltergeist. So that's probably his most successful film ever. But it's more remembered for Spielberg than it is for Tobe Hooper. People aren't, Life Force, which is another great film, is a cult film. Invaders from Mars remake is a cult film. These are movies that didn't make any money on their release. The 12 Murder.
He also did make Salem's Lot too.
Yeah, but that's a weird oddity because it was a TV movie. So I don't know how the financing for that really works for him, because it didn't get a theatrical release in some territories. But it's a television movie when he was still like a popular person to call. I think his last great movie was probably the Toolbox Murders remake. That was an amazing remake, one of the few great remakes, but it did not do well theatrically. I don't know how much financially it was, because there was a sequel that I've never seen. I never saw the sequel. He wasn't involved, so I never saw it. Probably that's for the better. But it's a shame. It is really a shame that he just wasn't giving enough or more opportunities to expand past this.
Yeah, it is.
It's one of the things that a lot of horror directors had to fight for. Even John Carpenter, as much as we all love John Carpenter, you could put on one hand how many of his films were actually financially successful, but like 80% of his films are huge cult films. Like he's undeniably probably one of the most. His movies are like cult classics through and through for everybody. I think Wes Craven was probably the most successful financially of those directors. Not even George Romero could match that. He kind of had the same thing. His zombie movies made money, and then the rest of them did. He was more, critics liked his movies more, I guess. Oh shit! But that being said, what are some of your final thoughts on Texas Chainsaw Massacre, since we kind of delved deep into this film?
Again, I think it is definitely a bookmark, historical horror movie again of the influences it has. Again, there's some product of its time with it, but I still think it is a good Kickstarter for a lot of things we see
Mhm.
now in horror movies, and I think and again I think that's really cool about it. So it's still again one of my favorite horror movies of all time, and yeah, and I still very much enjoy it.
Hmm. So, you know what? Uh, uh, despite the fact that I always tell people I have always hated this movie when I was a kid, the reason why I've watched it so many times are for specific things. Like I said, Tobe Hooper, Gunnar Hansen, Leatherface is by far one of my favorite horror icons. Um, doesn't yeah the many different people who have personified Leatherface over the decades now. Jesus, because this movie was 74, so we're hitting what, 50 years.
Yep.
51 years. Jeez. So maybe 10 years ago was the last time I watched this movie, because the last time I watched it was when I bought the 40th anniversary that they did for this film. So good God, I didn't realize it was 10 years ago. So it's been a long time since I've seen this film. But the thing is, of all the myriad of films in the franchise, this is one of the only 4 that I actually own and I actually watch. I actually watched this one and part 2 because I actually enjoy the first 2. But the thing is, I've always admired this franchise because it was never afraid to rewrite the rules with each film. You don't have to have seen the previous films to enjoy whichever one you're watching right then and there. That's the beauty of this franchise. You could watch part 2 and enjoy that fucking movie without having ever watched the first one. You can watch Texas Chainsaw 3D and enjoy that one without having watched any of the other ones. You can watch Leatherface, not Leatherface Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, but the prequel Leatherface, and not having watched any other films and still enjoy that film, if you enjoy that film. I'm not going to say it's a good film or a bad film, but, like all of the films in this franchise, each and every one of them has its different good qualities and bad qualities. One of the things I do like about it is that with each subsequent director that takes charge, they all have a different look, a different feeling, depending on which decade it's being placed in. Like, even they make a modern day film, it may be a sequel to the original film, like Texas Chainsaw 3D was, or they could do something like the latest Texas Chainsaw that was on Netflix, be a sequel to the first film and dismiss everything to the other films. Like, this franchise was doing that long before Halloween had its subsequent 3 different timelines. And 4, I don't know how many there are anymore. I stopped counting. This franchise just made it so that as a casual viewer, you don't have to have watched any of the previous movies to enjoy the movie you're in. And if you're a Leatherface fan, just watch the Leatherface ones. If you're a fan of just hardcore horror film that's from the 2000s, you watch the remakes, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I think the second one's called The Beginning. You can just watch those and enjoy those. But I think this franchise has something for everyone from any decade. You can be an old school fan and watch the films for nostalgia, or you can be a modern day audience member watching it for the very first time and still get something from out of these films. I think that is the underlying thing, the quality that makes these films stand out over all the other franchises out there. If you're watching Jason X is it's part of its time. It's not timeless. It's part of its time, and it's like, whoa, I don't know if I want to watch that again. This franchise is different than all the other ones out there, and I will not ever deny that. And I think that's the enduring quality for it. So, with that, for everyone out here listening for the show, we always rate the movies now according to our system: 1 star to 5 stars, 1 being horrible and 5 being amazing. Where, Philip, would you place the Texas Chainsaw Massacre as directed by Tobe Hooper from 1974?
I would definitely give it a 4 out of 5.
4 out of 5. Okay. All right. I was going to give it 4 too. If you would ask me this question 10 years ago, which was the last time I watched it, I would have probably given it a 2.5. Despite the fact that I love Gunnar Hansen and Tobe Hooper. I saw a lot more in this screening for this podcast than I ever have in the entire 40 years of my life having watched this film. Mostly because I just never bothered to pay that much attention to this film ever. To be honest with you, I'm a Leatherface fan. I like Gunnar Hansen, but I never really paid anything to the story. It simply was, to me, a bunch of kids go out there from a van and end up in Leatherface's house and they get killed. And that was pretty much all I ever took this movie for. Um, I know it sucks. Sometimes when you grow up watching these films, that's, in the era or sort of near the era when they were made, that's how you feel. Like, you watched it much later than me, so you have a different ideal about the film. You can go back and watch it and say, oh, I can get this now. It's the 2000s, but I've seen the remakes. I've gone back to the original and say, oh, I can appreciate that. But when I was watching it as a kid in the 80s, I had all the 80s movies to watch, and this one was like at the bottom of the barrel. Like, so with that, I'm gonna give it a 4 because the thing is, like I said, it's grown on me over the years, more so than any of the other sequels in the entire franchise. And I'm still a huge Gunnar Hansen and Tobe Hooper fan. I will always be a fan of both those two amazing talents. And Leatherface is one of the quintessential horror icons out there. I love the fact that every movie has you have a different face, and that the newer movies are explaining where the faces come from. I just love that aspect of this franchise. So, all right. All right. For everyone out there who has been listening to our rant and raving about the movie Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre, we hope that you've enjoyed this conversation. We hope that you go out there, you like, share, follow, subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Our regular episodes are every Wednesday at 8, and then all of our special episodes are released on Mondays. So with that, I hope that you have enjoyed this conversation with me and Philip Ray. Go out there and watch some of the previous episodes we've done. We have not done any other films in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, but we will soon. So make sure to subscribe so you never miss them. From all of us here at Something Wicked Entertainment, have a pleasant day and keep watching those horror films. Conversations in Horror is a Broken Lighthouse Pictures production, written, produced, and directed by Kevin L. Powers, executive producer Kelly A. Inoka. All contents and material from this episode of Conversations in Horror is copyright 2025 Broken Lighthouse Pictures.